As many of you viewers of these Thunderbolt videos are aware, in 2015, I was able to complete the derivation of a mathematical physical model of a so-called force-free current, also sometimes called a field-aligned current. What motivated this project was my earlier interest in determining the exact shape of those electric plasma currents that flow from the sun the awesome distance of some 93 million miles to supply power to light up Earth's auroras. Christian Birkeland predicted the existence of these flows way back in 1908. Only when satellites detected the magnetic signatures of electric currents in the auroras in 1973 was Birkeland's hypothesis irrefutably validated. Though for another couple of decades, many astronomers resisted the implications of his discovery, and some still do. They don't like the idea of electricity up there. The flows he discovered are now called Birkeland Currents in his honor. My model is described by a set of 5 equations that can be used to produce three-dimensional images of both the internal and the external appearance and the workings of a typical Birkeland current. It's based on answering a very simple question. If we have a moving plasma cloud consisting of positive and negative ions, protons, electrons, and other particles such as neutral atoms, in otherwise completely empty space, and we leave it absolutely alone, we don't touch it, what shape, what structure, if any, will this stream attempt to take on? What forces will these moving charges impose on each other, and how will they respond? What will the result be? The derivation is a fairly complex one that involves some fancy vector calculus, but the structural shape that results is elegantly simple and testable. It turns out that the flow is essentially a cylindrical tube that contains plasma moving in coaxial spiral, that is helical paths. As we get farther away from the central axis of the flow, the pitch angles of those spiral pathways gradually increase. Now, this produces an intertwined internal structure that has several self-maintaining properties. Nothing leaks out of the resulting flow, for one, and this immediately explains why BCs can maintain their integrity over distances of millions of miles, and now we think perhaps even millions of light years. One of the unique properties of any Birkeland current can be seen by viewing a cross-section of the structure of the model. This clearly shows counter-rotation. There are clockwise flows at certain radial distances out from the center axis and counterclockwise rotation at other distances. We have known for many years that Birkeland currents power the auroral displays we see in the night sky, but were counter-rotating plasmas observed? It was quickly discovered that, yes, counter-rotation is often seen in Earth's auroras. And it's also seen in NASA videos of the poles of several of the planets, especially Saturn and Jupiter. This is evidence that what we're saying is correct, that counter-rotation does exist in these Birkeland currents. It seems that the coaxial counter-rotation property is a unique property of Birkeland currents. No other natural process that we are aware of produces it. So in my mind, the race was on to find more examples. If you see coaxial counter-rotation anywhere, keep your eyes open for the Birkeland current that causes it. Birkeland currents can carry electrical charges in both directions, much like a coaxial cable carries normal electrical currents here on Earth. When we power up a light bulb, it takes 2 wires, one to carry charge from the voltage source to the light, and another wire to carry those charges back to the ground terminal of the source, to complete the circuit, as it's called. When charges are delivered to Earth by a Birkeland current, they work their way down to the surface from the top of the atmosphere. Now, quite often that journey results in the beautiful auroral lights. But sometimes also they create other visible discharges in the Earth's high-altitude plasma, such as the so-called elves, sprites, and gnomes seen by the pilots of high-flying aircraft. Thinking about the now accepted fact that Birkeland currents power the auroras, and recognizing that those auroras often exhibit coaxial counter-rotation, I wondered if the wind patterns high above Earth's poles also behaved in a similar way. There's an internet website called earth.nullschool.net that shows wind and water patterns in Earth's oceans and atmosphere. If you go to that site, you can click on the word Earth to bring up the menu and select HD high def, and then pick mode equals air, animate equals wind, height equals 10 hectopascals. This is at an altitude of approximately 35 kilometers. That's the highest level that the Earth.null gives us. Set overlay to wind and projection to O, and in the image, click and drag the Earth's northern hemisphere down to show the North Pole. Then go over to the control line of the menu and change the date, I think it's the second symbol, to year 2022, month of January, 01, and date 08. If you click on any wind flow, you will see its direction and velocity in the upper left. To close the menu, click on the word Earth, and you can see the whole Earth. Hannes Alfvén said that moving plasma, when it contacts neutral gas, can drag the gas along with it. With that in mind, and using the right-hand rule, point your right thumb in the direction of the axial current, and then your curved fingers will show the direction of the magnetic field and the moving plasma. Doing this, we see that the Birkeland Current's central axial current is moving positive charges up and out of the North Pole. If you turn the Earth over by dragging the pole with your mouse, you can see a similar but much weaker current emerging from the South Polar region. The Earth in its orbit is closest to the Sun in January. At that time, its North Pole is pointing away from the Sun. The electric universe model presumes the Sun is charged to a higher voltage than its surroundings, and therefore there will be an electric field radiating outward from it. With those facts in mind, we expected that in January, there might be a strong inward current from the higher voltage neighborhood of the Sun entering the Earth's South Pole and outward at the North Pole, flowing away from the Sun. Similarly, it was thought that in June, there might be a slightly weaker current going into the North Pole and out the South Pole, weaker because we're farther away from the Sun. Nothing even remotely akin to that was observed. That was not seen at all. Well, what was observed? Monthly examinations were made by sampling the earth.nullschool.net website video images over a 5-year time span, June of 2014 through June of 2019. And the important observed results were actually two. The first was during the Northern Hemisphere summer. That's called aphelion. Earth is as farthest from the Sun as it gets. Current enters into both the North and South Poles. The second thing that we observed was that during the Northern Hemisphere winter, that's called perihelion, Earth is closest to the Sun, current is directed out of both the North and South Poles. What should we make of this? How do we interpret it? What's going on? From December through February, the Northern Hemisphere winter, perihelion, Earth is nearest the Sun, and according to electric universe theory, it should be picking up positive charge in this higher voltage region. But we see from our observations that the Birkeland current is directed out of both hemispheres during this time. Earth is just, therefore, losing positive charge via the Birkeland current during this period. Just the opposite of what we might think. 6 months later, a similar surprise awaited us. Earth in its elliptical orbit is farthest from the Sun then at its aphelion, around the 4th of July, and thus at its greatest orbital distance. The Sun's electric field is producing a lower voltage neighborhood there. Therefore, Earth ought to be dumping positive charge out into that lower voltage neighborhood. But if we look at the Null School net site, it's clear that the Birkeland current is dumping positive charge into us. Now, this unexpected behavior of the Sun-Earth BC was observed at every single one of the observed aphelion, perihelion times during the 5 years we observed the site. What could the explanation be for what we observed? After considering this apparent contradiction, we came, after much thought, to the following conclusion. There is no contradiction. There are two different processes going on. One, Earth, when it's closest to the Sun in January, is indeed collecting charge, just as the EU theory says it should. And it does this from all possible directions through the extremely large surface area of Earth's toroidal, that is to say, donut-shaped plasmasphere that completely surrounds the Earth. The charges come from positive charged interplanetary plasma through which the Earth is moving. And two, but during this same time, we've observed that the Birkeland current stream that directly connects the Sun to Earth's poles is removing positive charges from Earth. The Birkeland current is acting like a pipeline that carries charge directly out of two comparatively small cusps in Earth's magnetosphere near its poles, back towards the outer coronal region of the Sun. So both these processes are going on simultaneously. Therefore, this newly discovered Birkeland current mechanism apparently works to stabilize Earth's net charge over the course of the year. It's a natural compensating negative feedback mechanism which tends to neutralize or at least minimize any seasonal variation in Earth's net charge. The Birkeland current supplies positive charge when Earth is losing it from its surrounding plasma because it's passing through the low voltage region. And then the Birkeland current removes the excess charge Earth is taking on while it's passing through the Sun's high voltage region and is collecting charge. This counterflow of charge provided by the Birkeland current that directly connects the Sun to Earth effectively counteracts any fluctuation in Earth's charge that might otherwise perturb its orbital stability. The Birkeland current also provides a return path for all of the electric charge delivered here by coronal mass ejections and the solar wind. It doesn't pile up on Earth. Where does it go? It goes back through the Birkeland current. There are many instances of such automatic negative stabilizing feedback mechanisms in astrophysics. One obvious one is the ability of a Birkeland current to self-repair itself from any damage done by a perturbation in one or more of its current density components. Anyway, there are a variety of things that one can see by manipulating the menu choices of this excellent website. One of the most informative is to get an image on a date when the 10 hectopascal flow is quite regular, circular or at least smooth. You can suggest one out of the bunch might be December 17th, 2014. That's 2014-12-17. Then select a series of lower altitudes. Higher hectopascal pressure levels mean you're going down and the pressure in the atmosphere is getting larger. So go down to 70, 250, and go all the way down to the surface. Anyway, notice that the farther down, the closer to the surface we get, the more chaotic, less smooth and regular, and slower the patterns become. It makes sense because if you place the mouse pointer over a wider, closely spaced, faster wind flow, you can left-click and measure its velocity. Generally, the higher our altitude, the faster and more regular the wind flows are. This demonstrates that the Birkeland current, which is quite well formed as it comes through space, drives the flow at its highest 10 hectopascal level, way up at the top. This flow frictionally drives the air at the next lower level and so on. The lowest levels experience frictional contact with the geographical surface features, and this breaks up the smooth, almost circular global flows and reduces their velocities compared to what we see at the higher levels. What this makes clear is that Earth's polar wind patterns are driven from outside electrically and not by any surface or internal earthbound processes or dynamos, the favorite word of astronomers when they don't know what's going on. The main outside source of these polar winds is quite obviously the varying strength and polarity, that is to say direction, of the Birkeland current system of electrically charged particles that it delivers here both to and from the Sun. In other words, we now have undeniable scientific evidence of cause and effect. Solar Birkeland currents cause patterns in the polar winds, which affect the weather on the planet. Yet another verification of the electric universe model of cosmology.